Welcome to the Aquifer Science Breakout Track. We've got some amazing speakers today and some really interesting talks. My name is Jill Garcia. I'm a geologist with the Upper Trinity Groundwater District and excited to be y'all's facilitator this afternoon. So we've got 3 compelling topics lined up for today's session. So please have the opportunity to thank your speakers after this session with a kind word or a drink at happy hour, whatever they prefer, honestly. And just some quick reminders before we get started. There's going to be a Q&A time after each of the presentations, so you'll get the opportunity to ask. And if you have the opportunity, we're happy to repeat that question for those of y'all that are tuning in online. We just want to make sure everybody can hear everything they need to. So with that, today we've got Dr. Panday. He is a principal engineer with GSI Environmental, a visiting research professor at the University of Nebraska, and has more than 32 years of experience in complex groundwater modeling and water resource management. There we go. His bio is located on page 28 of y'all's pamphlets, so please go ahead and look at that, and please give a warm welcome to our first speaker, Dr. Panday.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's after lunch, and I know we're all very sleepy, and I have some slow things to begin with, but then I think I'll pick up the pace, so hopefully we can wake everyone up. And with that, my talk today is on conversion of open pit mines to a water supply reservoir, and this work was done by Kurt Zeiler, Robert Wyckoff, and Cindy Ridgway helped with this as well. And I'm the presenter. I will fend questions as best as I can. And with that, what about open pit mining reclamation in Texas? What are the regulations? So first thing is that the regulations are available online. And what the regulation says that sand and gravel pits are regulated for safety by the Texas Department of Transportation, but mine reclamation is not regulated by state law. And if you go to the website, they say that, you can walk away from your mine if you want to without reclamation. There is no state law saying that you have to do that. Operations may be regulated by the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. So this is mine operations, not about reclamation, okay? And if it affects groundwater or has a surface water discharge, and there's a website for that. Aggregate production operations, APOs, that's the short form we'll use for that, must submit a storm pollution prevention plan. And APOs over sensitive areas require a water pollution abatement plan, that's the WPAP, to outline the best management practices to protect the water quality. And the best management practices guidance for APOs in Texas is, first thing is develop a mine plan, outlining your pre-mining, mining, and reclamation activities. Submit that final stabilization report for approval to Texas TCEQ. Certify the best management practices, the mine plan, and stabilization report by a Texas PG or a PE, professional engineer. And regulations allow open pit mines to be reclaimed as surface water storage reservoirs, subject to a no harm criterion. And that's the basic thing. That's all that's required in Texas. So there are examples, not many. We searched for some examples of where quarries are used as reservoirs in Texas, and we found a website for that. Essentially, Sando Lakes Ranch was a former coal mining operation, and it was restored to lakes and farmland. But we are not aware of other quarries being reclaimed as surface water reservoirs. There are some which have been used for managed aquifer recharge. So they would bring the water in there to recharge the aquifers, but not generally as a surface water reservoir. Okay. A couple of more examples here. City of Groesbeck during the 2021 through 2015 drought, they considered developing water supply from a nearby quarry. But I believe by the time they pushed the water into the stream, it never reached the supply. It just dried up. It just infiltrated into the ground. Then the Borheim quarry, it recharges water to Barton Springs. But again, this is not a water supply reservoir. Again, it's being used to recharge the aquifer. And Onion Creek proposed to use quarries for temporary retention to reduce flood volume. So that could have been like a reservoir, but for flood mitigation purposes. Okay. Legislative efforts have been there in Texas for converting APOs to reservoirs. There's been the 86th legislative section, and there have been two bills, HB 2238 and SB 978. They are both have their own websites. And the study feasibility of converting quarries and surface mine pits for use as water storage reservoirs neither passed, but the Senate version had a hearing at least. So it went a little further than nowhere. Okay. Now, gravel pits as surface water storage reservoirs. Why? Let's talk about that. So in Colorado, former mining sites are required to be reclaimed for beneficial use. So they have to do that. Unlike Texas, you can walk away from it. Where appropriate, regulations allow open pits to be reclaimed as surface water storage reservoirs and primarily aggregate pits, because you don't have to worry about water quality too much if you are using an aggregate pit for surface water storage. And there are two divisions of Department of Natural Resources which oversee that. One is the Mine Reclamation Department, and then the DWR is for the water rights, to look at, okay, where do the water rights go if you are creating a surface water reservoir? So why? Why would you do something like that? First thing is you can sell or lease the stored water to municipalities, industry, or agriculture. You can make use of the water, of course. Planning and permitting is much less intensive and costly for this. And construction is partially completed because mining has already removed the materials. So literally your next step to do is construct a liner for the bathtub and create low permeability barrier walls along the sides so that you don't have groundwater interfering with your reservoir or vice versa. And potential issues and impacts. Lined reservoirs form a potential barrier to groundwater flow. So you are lining your reservoir, well, that's going to be a barrier to flow through the system. Groundwater mounding up gradient of the barrier, and down gradient you are going to get a dip in your groundwater system. And pits are in alluvium may prevent natural groundwater discharges to rivers, streams, lakes, wells. So we need to make sure what sort of an impact is there before we move forward with even the permitting process. And the likely impacts are to simulate cutoff walls with the groundwater model to see how the cutoff walls behave. And the existing model of the South Platte River alluvium, there was an existing model. So we said, let's use this model. It's been vetted, and let's see how the system behaves. It's a regional model, so it's not really appropriate for local scale evaluations, and I'll talk a little about that. And this ModFlow, it's a ModFlow model. We all use ModFlow these days. And it has this horizontal flow barrier package. What is this horizontal flow barrier? You can actually create a wall with limited flow through it in your model itself. So we can use that as a barrier for the reservoir sides and for the bottom. So essentially, we had the regional model, and this is the system here. Two proposed pits east of the South Platte River. That's the South Platte River over there. And there are two, in the pink, these are these two proposed pits that they were planning on converting to surface water reservoirs. There are already surface water reservoirs, and these here, 1, 2, and 3. already existing here, which have been open pits for quarries, and they've been reclaimed as surface water reservoirs. But there are also existing supply wells here. And so what the task for us was to do is see how do we affect, if we did convert these pits to surface water reservoirs, how would it affect the wells, but also how would it affect the base flow to the South Platte River? So am I interfering with the flow to the river? So what we did is we had the mod flow model, and we cannot use a regional model for local scale evaluations, but we have the model available. So what we did is right away refine the grid around where our region of interest is. And that is the big grid for the regional model. We refined it like 4 steps further. Okay, and this is called a quad tree refinement, which is there in ModFlow 6, ModFlow USG. The latest ModFlows have this capability where you can refine your grids locally where you need to. So that's the first step. Then we implemented these flow barriers around where the pits would be. That's hydraulic flow barrier. Sorry, that HFB is a hydraulic flow barrier. And with expected K values, to see how K is the hydraulic conductance, to see how easily the water can communicate between the reservoir and the aquifer. And we simulate this with and without these barriers for the proposed cutoff well. So always, how do we understand what is the impact of the mine? Let us look at the base case first without the mine. Then we run the model with the mine being converted to a reservoir and take differences. So that's how you can really analyze what is the impact of the mine itself. And the model could have errors in general, and those errors would cancel off when you are doing those differences, right? So the differences will actually capture what is the impact of the reservoir of the mine and converting it to the reservoir itself. So that impact it will capture. And in capturing that impact, what could be the uncertainties? The uncertainties could be just around the reservoir itself. How well is it communicating with the groundwater? So when you are looking at sensitivities to try and understand what is the uncertainty for this application, that is what we look at, right? So you are focusing more on what is the reservoir doing to the groundwater, not whether the groundwater model somewhere else is, very well calibrated or not very well calibrated, because that cancels out in the wash. Okay, and going back to the results of this, essentially, we computed the maximum groundwater level changes through the simulation. And essentially, what we saw for this case was that there was a mounding on the upstream side of the reservoir and a dip in the water levels on the downstream side. It kind of acts like a dam there, right? I mean, there's a dam here, so you are going to get water build up on the upstream side, and it kind of flows around it. And on the downstream side, you get the dip. And there was about a 4-foot mounding at any time, and the water level declines on the downstream side was maximum of 1.5 feet. Maximum water level change at the supply wells itself was about 1 foot. So the people using that well would have to use 1 foot more of extra energy to withdraw that water. And the supply wells were simulated to be able to pump at the maximum permitted pumping rates. And it could do that. So that was what we submitted to the client. Simulated stream base flow rates were nearly the same overall. So we also had to look at stream base flow rates. It's just that the distribution was different, but the water finally got to the stream. The same amount of water got to the stream as before. And yeah, the spatial locations changed. Okay. So in summary, reclamation of aggregate operations as surface water storage is a very attractive proposition because you've dug your pit already. Why reclaim it? It's a lot cheaper to create a beneficial use out of it. And you could, of course, reclaim it and put a park up there, and that's beneficial use too. So don't get me wrong on that. But as a hydrogeologist, the beneficial use to me is more that there's water available rather than that I play golf on top of a landfill. Groundwater models are tools to assess the potential impacts, and we've used the ModFlow, a hydraulic flow barrier package. If there were water quality impacts to be considered, we could have taken care of that. So if there was issues with the quarry itself feeding certain solutes out of it, we could take a look at that and see how these solutes move. For this case, the solutes would just go straight to the South Platte River. So there was it was so close to the river, and Colorado didn't have an issue with that. We didn't have to work with that. And impacts and mitigation strategies could be tested with models. So we tested different strategies, tested different sensitivities on this hydraulic flow barrier to see how does it impact the wells, to see how does it impact the river. And essentially, it didn't impact the river. It impacted the wells in different amounts, but still they could get the water they required. Okay, and that is my talk for today. Is everyone awake? Well, I know it's interesting for me to do this, but it can be very boring, right? But the takeaway is that, hey, we can get more water out of this, We can use our quarry pits as open storage reservoirs. And in Texas, there is not that much regulation that prevents you from doing that. Okay, and I think that's the takeaway from this talk. Questions?
All right, I think everyone is still digesting their fajitas. Thank you, Dr. Panday. Quick question for you. Moving forward, what would be the next step that you would like to implement with the model? Would there be something you would like to refine or a new way you would like to implement it?
For this project, no. We looked at it in a complete holistic way. We did the sensitivities to see if we were wrong, how wrong were we? And again, the question then that came up is, we could be wrong in our parameters, but how wrong is the results of interest, which is what they care about, is like, did we dry up the wells? They don't care whether the sand had a particular hydraulic conductivity or not. That becomes research. Well, as consultants, what we need to do is solve problems, and that's always been the focus. So hopefully, if someone thinks of more to do, we can talk about it, but I think we've kind of answered their questions.
Excellent. All right, well, let's give Dr. Panday a hand. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.